As Art came outside of that place, he found himself lying and he would never be able to meet her again. He tried to get up but was still lying and thought that his mind was swamped with memories of around 4 months he had spent with Sylvia. For a time he saw both long and short, and she always treated him like her son, teaching him all the things that he had lacked since coming to that world. He just felt something different. And just then he heard Sylvia's voice calling his name. Art asked if she really was Sylvia. She agreed and said that if he was listening to her, then that meant she had shown him what she actually was. He remembered that Sylvia had done something to him and left that message. She told him that as frustrating as that might seem, he was nearly ready for the whole truth, and his body was that of a boy who had barely passed 4, and whose mana core had already progressed to the dark red stage. He wasn't strong enough. And as a small parting gift, she infused his unique will into him, and his future development as a mage would depend on how well he was able to use her gift. He wondered that who asked for the gift. Sylvia continued that she could imagine what he might be feeling at that time, like sorrow, anger, guilt. But he just remembered that he had a family to look out for and a purpose to fulfill in that life, and her only wish for him was to embrace the joys and innocence of childhood and become a man of whom both his parents and she could be proud. Art saw the egg and took it. She continued that when his mana core was past the whole stage, he would hear from her once again, and at that time she would explain all things. So until then, she said goodbye, and she considered him as the King Grey. Art thought that questions continued to pester him long after the voice of Sylvia disappeared, and he wondered how long she had known his identity, and how she had even known. But there was one thing that was clear, that if he focused on training for the sake of revenge, that life would hardly be different from his last, and from that time he could only move forward. As he walked, he wondered where he was. He ran so fast, climbed trees, and headed ahead. He wondered that even with mana, his vision was restricted. But there was one thing he knew, that he was deep in the Elsha forest. Even just barely being able to use the mana restoration that Sylvia had taught him, he was able to use magic for a longer time, and still, he couldn't help but wonder how he had ended up there. Sylvia had told him that he would arrive at the position where there were some people nearby, and no matter what, he should just keep looking around, as he was getting pretty good at the tree-traveling business. As he jumped from tree to tree, he heard the screams of a human. He started heading towards that voice, hoping they could help him. As he came close, he saw a carriage and some men there. One said they should get ready as they were only a few days away from leaving that forest. The second one mentioned that elf girls were going for a lot. The third one added that the elf was a child too, so she hadn't done something like that, and she would definitely fetch them a lot. The boss told them to shut up, put her back in the carriage, and said they needed to move. Art realized that those were slave traders, and there was an elf with them. As they were heading, Art thought that he didn't have any idea how those people managed to get their hands on the forest hound, but he knew that getting one of them would be his best bet out of the forest. As for those slave traders, with all the crap that had happened to him lately, it looked like he would be able to let off some steam. By chasing them, he thought that, besides his eagerness to get back home, he had a different plan to deal with those slave traders. The first and best course of action would be attacking them. But he didn't strike immediately. Attacking all 4 would be suicide for him, so he followed them, waited, and gathered more strength to make his move when they least expected it. Finally, the time came when he took a stone to hit the tree. They all heard that, and one said to shut those hounds before they woke up everything in the forest. As he was going to do so, Art thought that without any weapon, he was forced to utilize a technique from his past life, and he wasn't even sure it would work in this world. Then something blue came over his hand. A man told the hounds that they should just chew each other's antlers if they were bored. Just then, Art came down and slashed the neck of that man, killing him. He then took a knife from the man's body. The hounds saw the dead body and started eating it. One of the larger hounds commented that the hounds were quiet and wondered what was taking their friend so long to come back, as he was urinating on something pink. Art quickly closed his mouth and slashed his knife at the man, killing him too. Art thought that it was as expected. Fighting was a lot harder and more tiring in this body, and he should finish this quickly while the last 2 were still asleep. Suddenly, someone said something. Art wondered what had just happened. The leader of the group asked why it was so noisy and where their comrades were. Just as the third one felt something, Art slashed his sword, but Art dodged and killed him as well. As he screamed, the leader saw, and the man said that the child was a mage. The leader was shocked and dropped his sword, saying that they didn't want to accidentally kill the golden egg that had just appeared in front of them. He then used magic, and said that the child might fetch them even more than the elf girl. Just then he came behind Art and said to don't die. He then attacked Art, but Art dodged and struck the leader's face with something. Art then attacked the man with his sword, which seemed imbued with blue magic. However, the leader grabbed the knife and dismissed it as a cute trick, then countered with an attack using Art's own knife. Art thought the man was incredibly fast. The man kicked Art, causing him to fall, and demanded that Art come to him. As he held Art upside down, he taunted that Art couldn't do anything with his small body. Art realized that considering mana like a blade seemed to behave similarly to wind magic in that world. If that was the case, he should use fire magic. He condensed the fire, creating a blast that exploded on the man's hand, burning it. Enraged, the man vowed to kill Art and didn't care if he had to sell Art's corpse. Art took his sword and attacked the man's neck, killing him. The remaining man pleaded not to be killed. Art thought that the little elf girl would say the same thing. He approached her, relieved, and told her it was safe outside, so she could return home. The elf's hands, mouth, and legs were tied with rope. Art then covered her eyes, and she asked for the reason. He replied that there were things kids were better off not seeing. She commented that he was also a kid. He agreed and told her not to take the cloth off until he told her to, and they should keep a good distance away. As they got some distance, he instructed her to open her eyes. She thanked him for saving her. He replied that it was nice to meet her. She then grabbed her shirt and asked how he could leave a small girl there, as she was so scared, and pleaded for him not to leave her. He explained that the bad guys wouldn't chase her anymore, and that he needed to get back home. Besides, weren't elves generally safe in that forest anyway? She disagreed and said that beasts were only scared of adults. Her parents had told her that kids would get eaten by hounds or the tree golems. Art then asked if she knew how long it would take to get to where she lived from there. She replied that she didn't know. Art became frustrated and told her to stay there while he went to gather some supplies, assuring her that the trip wouldn't be too long. She agreed. After that, Art salvaged what he could for their journey and packed a huge bag. He thought it was a shame they couldn't take the carriage, but it might be for the best as they would stick out like sore thumbs riding in it. He noticed the hounds and could only hope that the elves had something that could take him back to the human kingdom. He then went to Tessia and mentioned that he found some clothes inside the carriage, assuming they belonged to her, and she could wear the cloak over them since it might get cold. She took the clothes and thanked him. He patted her head and said, "Let's get back home." As they walked in the vague direction she pointed to, Art got to know more about the elf. He asked for her name, and she replied that it was Tessia, then inquired about his name. Art told her, and she asked how he ended up in the Elsha forest. He replied that it was a long story. She said they had plenty of time. They encountered many hounds in front of them, and afterward, Art explained that he was separated from his family. Tessia deduced that he came from the human kingdom. So it was true that all male humans were perverts and had more than one wife. Art asked who had told her that. Tessia replied that her grandpa had told her so. He then came and jokingly said that he was sure there were perverts among the elves as well, and then he asked if she knew the meaning of that word. She denied. He explained that only some nobles preferred to have multiple wives and then asked what it was like living in Eleanor. Tessia replied that it was fun, and she spent a lot of time with her caretakers and grandpa since her parents were busy. She mentioned that once she awakened, she would probably be given a mentor to train under, and she was excited about that prospect. Art commented that the education system seemed a bit more selective in Eleanor if everyone was assigned a private mentor upon awakening. He then showed her an animal and a knife, which scared her. She asked what he was talking about. Art replied that he was just talking to himself. While cooking the animal, Art was eating, and Tessia asked him what happened to those bad guys who were taking her away. He answered that they ran into a rather unfortunate accident. She asked if they would try to find her again. He promised that they wouldn't bother her again. She was happy to hear that and thanked him. As night fell, he told her to go and sleep. She then asked about him. Art replied that he would keep guard outside, so she went inside the tent they had made. Art thinks to use that time to check what Sylvia left for him. Just then, she came outside and asked if he really didn't want to rest. She mentioned that her grandpa had never shared the end of a story with a boy, but she wouldn't tell on him. He replied that he was fine and not sleepy. She agreed and said that beasts were more likely to appear if they noticed him there because they would see that he was a kid. She proposed that for their safety he should keep guard inside the tent for his security, not because she was scared. He went inside and told her to just sleep. She lay down, and he sat next to her, thinking that she was right, so she should get enough rest. Hi guys, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy the content.